happening in Israel-Gaza conflict. The news says Cook uses donations to feed 50 Palestinian families. Overnight, Israeli airstrikes killed dozens in Gaza. US strikes Iran-linked sites in Syria, says Pentagon. EU leaders seek Israel-Gaza air corridors and Maine on lockdown amidst shooter manhunt. Stay with me for these and more stories. On Israel-Palestine conflict, among the lots of tents set up for the displaced Palestinian families by the United Nations-run training college in the city in southern Gaza, huge metal cauldrons full of bubbling white beans and bread sauce are cooked over an open fire. One of the cooks ladles a serving to the huddle of mostly children who are holding out metal bowls and pots. According to Abu Ibrahim Zakud, the cook, this latest initiative, which just set up on Wednesday, has already managed to feed 50 families or about 500 people. The man behind the idea is Abu Al-Abed Al-Masri from Beit Hanun, who was displaced with his whole family of over 50 people, Zakud says. People donated food and cooking utensils, and the team gathered of volunteers from Zakud's family cooked lentils on the first day. The Israeli offensive on the Gaza Strip, which erupted on October 7th after a surprise Hamas attack that killed 1,405 Israelis, has been the most ruthless for the last 15 years. Israeli warplanes have bombed the Gaza Strip for 3 weeks from the north to the south and enforced a total blockade, cutting off electricity, fuel, and destroying the communications tower. Over 7,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to the health ministry, including 2,913 children and 1,709 women. A further 1,950 people are missing under the rubble of their homes, including 940 children. All neighborhoods have been leveled to the ground, and the indiscriminate bombing has led to the internal displacement of 1,004 million Palestinians of a population of 2.3 million, the United Nations said. The Israeli military has dropped leaflets and called Palestinians on their mobile phones, warning them to flee their homes in northern Gaza and Gaza City and head south. Zakud and his family, 10 members altogether, were forced to leave their home in Beit Hanun in northern Gaza and make their way south to Khan Younis. Still on Israel-Gaza war, according to Palestinian medical sources and reports, Israeli airstrikes on Gaza have killed several people overnight. At least 15 people were killed in air attacks on the city of Khan Younis, southern Gaza, a medical source said on Friday. The Palestinian journalist Yasser Abu Namus and his mother were among those killed in the pre-dawn strikes. At least 30 others were killed in attacks across the enclave, reports said. No less than 10 people were killed in a strike on a 4-story house in Al Zaytun neighborhood, southeast of Gaza City, while 8 others were killed in air attacks on Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza. Another 12 people, including a child, were killed in an Israeli strike in Rafah. 4 people were also killed after Israeli forces carried out a pre-dawn attack in the occupied West Bank, Palestinian sources said. According to Gaza's health ministry, over 7,000 Palestinians, including closely 3,000 children, have been killed in Gaza since Israel launched its war on Hamas. Israel has vowed to eliminate Hamas in reaction to the armed group's unprecedented October 7th attacks, which Israeli officials say killed at least 1,405 people, mostly civilians. The death toll from the fighting between Israel and Hamas has become a source of contention amidst claims and counterclaims about the true number of casualties. Joe Biden, United States President, earlier this week cast doubt over the figures, saying that he has no confidence in the number that the Palestinians are using. On Thursday, Gaza's health ministry released a list of over 7,000 names that was paired with government identification numbers to support its accuracy. Away from Israel-Gaza war now to the United States, the Pentagon has said the U.S. has attacked 2 facilities in Syria used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Iran-backed groups following a sequence of attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. The strikes came after President Joe Biden's administration promised to respond to attacks on U.S. personnel that Washington has blamed on armed groups backed by Iran. On Thursday, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in a statement that the United States does not seek conflict and has no intention nor desire to engage in further hostilities, but these Iranian-backed attacks against US forces are unacceptable and must stop. Iran wants to hide its hand and deny its role in these attacks against our forces. We will not let them. If attacks by Iran's proxies against US forces continue, we will not hesitate to take further necessary measures to protect our children. Austin said the narrowly tailored strikes were in self-defense and were not linked to the Israel-Hamas war. They are separate and distinct from the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas and do not constitute a shift in our approach to the Israel-Hamas conflict, he said. White House National Security Council spokesman had earlier cautioned that Washington will react to the attacks at a time of our choosing and a manner of our choosing. Kirby's comments came as the U.S. Department of Defense said on Thursday that U.S. and allied forces in Iraq and Syria had been attacked at least 16 times this month by Iranian-backed militia groups. According to U.S. officials, a total of 21 U.S. personnel have been wounded in the attacks, most of them suffering traumatic brain injuries. Reports of attacks on U.S. forces in the region have surged since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war, which broke out earlier this month when the Palestinian group launched an unprecedented attack on Israel that Israeli officials said killed more than 1,400 people. Palestinian authorities say over 7,000 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in Gaza carried out in response to Hamas on October 7th attacks. On Wednesday, Biden said he had directly warned Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei against aiming U.S. troops in the Middle East. Washington and Tehran do not have formal diplomatic ties, and Biden did not say how the message was communicated. Mohammad Jamshidi, an aide to Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi, disputed Biden's accounts in a comment posted on social media. U.S. officials are worried about the possibility of fighting between Israel and Hamas intensifying into a broader regional conflict. Iran backs both Hamas, which governs Gaza, and the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah, which Israel has clashed with it in skirmishes along the Israel-Lebanon border. Iran's Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian said on Thursday at the United Nations that the U.S. will not be spared from this fire if Israel's bombardment of Gaza did not end. Now, European Union leaders have called for humanitarian halts in the fighting between Israel and the armed Palestinian group Hamas as the Gaza Strip rolls under an Israeli bombardment and siege. On Thursday, leaders at an EU summit in Brussels issued a declaration calling for a halt to the fighting to establish humanitarian corridors and get much-needed aid into Gaza. The European Council expresses its gravest concern for the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza and calls for continued, rapid, safe and unhindered humanitarian access and aid to reach those in need through all necessary measures, including humanitarian corridors and pauses for humanitarian needs, the declaration said. The declaration was made as disapproval grows from around the Middle East about Israel's campaign of air attacks and a complete siege, which has cut off access to food, water and electricity and fuel for the Strip's 2.3 million inhabitants. Thursday's summit is the first in-person meeting since Hamas carried out attacks on October 7th on southern Israel, which killed over 1,400 people, most of them civilians. The assault by Hamas has been widely criticized, with grim scenes emerging from towns in southern Israel where Palestinian gunmen massacred families and kidnapped more than 200 people. The EU leaders reiterated earlier calls for a quick release of those held captive without any precondition and emphasized Israel's right to defend itself in line with international law. But such statements, similar to others made by the United States, have rung hollow to some as Israel carries out devastating airstrikes that have leveled entire neighborhoods and killed over 7,000 people in Gaza, some in zones where Israel had told Palestinians to move to seek safety. In the Middle East, protesters have criticized Israel's allies as hypocritical. In the U.S., Palestinian groups expressed outrage when President Joe Biden reacted to the death toll in Gaza by casting doubt on the reliability of the figures provided by the Ministry of Health in Gaza, which is governed by Hamas. Health services in Gaza have been stretched to their limit as Israel chokes off access to much-needed medical supplies and doctors work under the light of phones and fuel supplies run out. Over the past week, a handful of trucks have begun delivering aid to Gaza through the Strip crossing, with Egypt the only remaining points of exit and entry. However, the supply of aid has been neither consistent nor adequate to address the scope of civilian suffering, with the United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres calling the efforts a drop of aid in an ocean of need. Now, on Friday, officials still are imploring thousands of residents to shelter in place while a massive search for a suspect continues as communities in Maine grieve 18 people killed in a shooting at a bowling alley and restaurant 2 days ago. Authorities consider the suspect, Robert Card, armed and dangerous, and schools, businesses, and other facilities have closed over safety concerns, while hundreds of law enforcement officers swarm parts of southern Maine in Card's pursuit. The horror started around 7 p.m. on Wednesday in the city of Lewiston, where authorities say Card opened fire at just-in-time recreation and then later at Scaminge's Bar and Grill. In addition to the 18 people killed, 13 others were injured, Maine Governor Janet Mills said on Thursday. The shooting and subsequent manhunt put shelter-in-place orders for Androscoggin and northern Sagadahoc counties, which encompass Lewiston and nearby Auburn and Lisbon communities. Wednesday's night's massacre appears to be the deadliest mass shooting in the United States this year. It is also the worst since a gunman killed 19 students and 2 teachers at a school in Uvalde, Texas last year. Overall, at least 566 mass shootings have happened this year across the country, with 4 or more shoots excluding the shooter, according to the Gun Violence Archive. Card 40 faces an arrest warrant in 8 counts of murder, police said. Authorities on Thursday at least twice converged Card's last known address, a home in Bodion, Maine, roughly 15 miles east of Lewiston. On Thursday evening, investigators believe they detected something inside or near the home, spurring a flurry of activity, law enforcement officials said, according to reports. But that episode appeared to end eventfully, with authorities leaving the scene 2 hours later and Maine State Police saying they were done there for the night. On weather and climate, Hurricane Otis leaves 27 dead in Acapulco. At least 27 people have been killed after Hurricane Otis, one of the strongest storms to ever hit Mexico, struck the Pacific Beach resort of Acapulco. Otis, with winds of 270 kilometers, 165 miles per hour, ripped roofs from homes and hotels, ripped trees from the ground, and largely cut off communications and road links with the region. Some hospitals were forced to evacuate patients amidst flooding that overwhelmed streets and left cars submerged in a trail of wreckage across the city of almost 900,000 people. President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador said, according to reports in Mexico City on Thursday, that what Acapulco suffered was really disastrous. According to authorities, several of those killed were swept away in overflowing rivers. 4 people remain missing. The government has not said how many were injured, but has declared a state of emergency in the region. In a matter of hours, Otis strengthened from a tropical storm to the most powerful category of the 5-step Saffir-Simpson scale before hitting land, taking authorities by surprise. It's unprecedented in the country in recent times, not only because of the way it strengthened so quickly, but also the magnitude of the hurricane, Lopez Obrador said. The World Meteorological Organization described the hurricane as one of the most rapidly intensifying tropical cyclones on record. In African scenes, Sudanese families flee to South Sudan. Families fleeing violence and chaos in Sudan are arriving in remote areas of northern South Sudan in a distressing turn of events. These displaced individuals are seeking refuge in a region where humanitarian organizations are grappling with the immense challenge of providing emergency assistance. Among those affected is Ujuma Akomut, a 29-year-old woman who fled her home in Bentiu, South Sudan back in 2016, damaged by the brutal violence that forced her to escape. She initially sought refuge in a camp in Ethiopia's Gambela region, but later moved to Sudan in hope of rebuilding her life. Unfortunately, when conflict broke out in Sudan in April, she and her family had to make a perilous journey across the border into South Sudan. The crisis is further exacerbated by the rainy season and an extreme lack of donor funding, which is impeding attempts to relocate people away from the border. This has worsened the already dire humanitarian situation in the overcrowded transit center located in the border town of the Reng. Since the eruption of the conflict in Sudan in April, an estimated 6 million people have been displaced from their homes in just 6 months. With no resolution to the ongoing violence in sight, numerous individuals seeking safety are continuing to pour into neighboring countries, including the Central African Republic, Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. Others have resorted to relocating within Sudan itself. The influx of South Sudanese returnees and refugees from Sudan is putting immense strain on the limited resources of a country that is still recovering from a prolonged civil war and the devastating consequences of climate change. Aid agencies are grappling with a multitude of challenges, including inadequate funding, poor access to affected regions, and inadequate infrastructure. To address their situation, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees (UNHCR) and its partners have established a presence at border crossing points in South Sudan. Their main mission is to monitor and provide aid to new arrivals who are primarily South Sudanese refugees returning to their home country. In partnership with other organizations, transit centers have been set up where new arrivals receive vital supplies such as food, water, and communal shelter. The centers also serve as a staging point to facilitate onward transportation to their desired destinations or home areas. UNHCR is additionally assisting families in reuniting with their relatives inside South Sudan. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll bring you more stories from Nigeria. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Stories from Nigeria says with the judicial matters, Supreme Court upholds Tinubu's election. Yesterday, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu relished the exciting experience of victory after the Supreme Court confirmed his lifelong ambition to lead Africa's most populous nation. The road to yesterday's victory, which started on January 10, 2022, when he declared his presidential ambition, was loaded with numerous twists and turns that included winning the All Progressives Congress (APC) presidential primary on June 8, 2022, against all odds, enduring a fierce and bitter-month-long campaign leading to the February 25, 2023 presidential election, and 4 long nights before he was eventually declared winner by the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC) on March 1, 2023. And lastly, the final hurdle, which was the legal fight that saw his challengers crisscross Nigeria and United States courts in the bid to have this election overturned. Yesterday, putting a seal to the legal fireworks over the poll, the Supreme Court dismissed the 2 appeals filed by presidential candidates of the People's Democratic Party (PDP), Atiku Abubakar, and that of the Labour Party (LP), Peter Obi. Atiku and Obi distinctly attacked the judgments of the Presidential Election Petition Court (PEPC), which in a 13-hour-long ruling on September 6th dismissed their petitions instituted against the conduct of the presidential election and its outcome. Disappointed with the judgment of the lower court, Atiku filed a notice of appeal on September 18th, followed by Obi's notice of appeal. A 7-member panel of justices of the Apex Court, headed by Justice John Ian Okoro, commenced delivery of the much-awaited verdict by 9:20 a.m. yesterday. The first to be determined was an appeal by Atiku. On Monday, at the last proceedings, Chris Uchisan, who led the legal team of Atiku and PDP, had told the court of an interlocutory application seeking the leave of the court to present new proof in the appeal. The fresh evidence Atiku sought to tender are the academic records of Tinubu, which were handed over to him by the Chicago State University (CSU) on October 2nd. Tinubu's lawyer, Wole Olanipe-Kunsan, raised an objection to the admissibility of the deposition, saying such depositions have to be adopted by the individual that deposed to it before it can be admitted to evidence before a court. Abubakar Mahmood, Olanipe-Kun, and Akin Olujimi, all sons who represented INEC and Tinubu and APC in their preliminary objections, urged the court to dismiss the appeal for lacking in merit and misconceived. in the ruling on the motion. The Apex Court dismissed the motion by Atiku seeking leave of court to file fresh evidence. Ruling on the motion, Justice John Ian Okoro held that a clinical look at the issues formulated by all the parties, it is clear that the argument is whether this court, as presently constituted, has the power to grant the motion. Justice Okoro held that out of the 7 issues distilled by Atiku for determination, none is linked or covered forgery which the appellant is seeking to bring in. The Constitution does not permit that, and this court has no jurisdiction to grant the filing of fresh evidence that was not pleaded at the PEPC. The Supreme Court also noted that Atiku did not even deem it fit to file for an amendment of his pleadings and for extension of time, since the 180 days allowed by the Constitution had elapsed since September 17th. And finally, on the news, Senate okays Aliyu as ICPC chair. On Thursday, the Senate confirmed the appointment of Musa Aliyu as the chairman of the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC. The Senate also confirmed the appointments of Gaji Dantata and Saka Suleiman as members of the Federal Judicial Service Commission. The Deputy Senate President, Jibrin Barrow, announced the confirmation of the nominees after they were cleared by a voice vote by senators at Thursday's plenary. Aliyu, a lawyer and former Attorney General of Jigawa State, was separately screened by the Committee of Whole. The ICPC chairman told the senators that he is a senior advocate of Nigeria, designate, and belongs to many human rights and anti-corruption organizations. During his screening, Dantata and Suleiman, also who appeared before the Senate for confirmation as members of the Federal Judicial Service Commission, also related their achievements in private and public sectors. A recap of major stories says Cook uses donations to feed 50 Palestinian families. Overnight, Israeli airstrikes killed dozens in Gaza. US strikes Iran-linked sites in Syria, says Pentagon. EU leaders seek Israel-Gaza air corridors. And Maine on lockdown amidst shooter manhunt. That's all on the news. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend ahead.